Hello, hello and welcome. 我叫 Roland Rudolph， 我是奥地利代表。我今天很高兴在这儿和我的中文不太好，可是给你说英文，对不起啊，谢谢。So I'm here today to present Austria a little bit, Austrian culture, of course. Because we are here at the Taipei International Book Exhibition, also more about Austrian literature and its most important proponents of Austrian literature, but also a little bit in general about economy, history, and other areas. So, please, next slide. Austria is in the heart, in the middle of Europe. So we are talking about, because we very often have the problem with Austria and Australia, Audalia, we always have this kind of problem. So this is the Austria in the middle of Europe. Some countries pretend to be in the center of Europe. I always say Austria is in the center of Europe. Please, next slide. And to sum it up, there are no kangaroos in Austria. They are in Australia. So, please, next slide. And to give a little bit of an impression about Austria, please watch this short video. So this was like a small taste of Austria, of Austria's beauty, Austria's natural beauty. Austria is very modern. Austria has a lot of varieties. So but here are some facts about form of government. I mean, it's very similar to Taiwan, I would say, because we have a parliamentary democracy with a sharing of power into the different branches of government. So the executive branch with the government, the judiciary with the high courts, and that's what democracy is about. Austria has about 84,000 square kilometers. I think Taiwan has about 26,000, 24,000. So Austria, I would say, is around 3 times the size of Taiwan. But concerning population, Austria just hit the 9 million mark. So it's about not yet 1/3 of the population here in Taiwan. Taiwan about 24 million, right? Yeah. And Austria is divided into 9 provinces, 9 states. It's a federal state with governors, districts, and also, of course, their own governments with local laws. So bureaucracy is quite high in Austria. So in Austria, just as an interesting fact, as part of the European Union, we have like 4 layers of law we're doing. So we have the local law. Local law means in the villages and cities. Then we have the provincial law in the provinces. Then we have national law. And then we have European Union law. So actually 4 layers of law, which seems to be quite complicated, but obviously Austria is a member since 1995, so it has been working for a long time. And the official language is German in Austria, but our language, our German language, our way of speaking German, it can be very, very different from that one spoken in Germany. It's like Mandarin and Taiwanese with its different dialects, and Austrian dialect can be quite... I always like examples. If you say the word tomato in English, it would be in German Tomate. Quite similar, right? But in Austria, we say Paradeiser. That's completely different because that's the apple from paradise. That's why we say Paradeiser, for example, right? Apart from German, we still have also more minority language, like Croat and Slovenian are the recognized minorities in Austria who have their own schools or bilingual schools in those languages. But of course, many people speak English in Austria. A high percentage point in Austria speaks also English. And of course, the capital, it's the second largest German-speaking city. That's Vienna, the capital of Austria, with also slowly but surely hitting the 2 million mark. So it's becoming bigger and bigger. Please, next slide. The history of Austria. Austria is about 1,000 years old. It was first mentioned in a document as Österreich in 996. And so this is, there's a little small mistake in there. It's plus 26 years, of course, now. So it's a little bit more than 1,000 years old. Please, next slide. Austria was always, during that time, during the medieval times, Austria was ruled by always changing families. In this case, we started out with the so-called Babenberg family, and the most important proponent was Leopold III. So he became famous, or let's say in the UK, in England, he became infamous because he arrested King Richard Lionheart, the one you know from Robin Hood. It's a true story. He was actually, from this point of view, he was arrested in Austria and imprisoned on a castle near the river Danube in Austria for a few years, until a heavy ransom was paid by his brother, who was regent during that time, so that he was released and then could finally return back to Britain. as the British king. Please, next slide. So after the Babenberg rule, there was a time when different aristocratic families and powers tried to take charge. And one family who was outstanding moved in actually from Switzerland, the family of Habsburg, who then ruled until 1918. So for more than 600 years. And they were not only clever, but they were a big family, and they expanded the Austrian kingdom, and then later on the Austrian Empire, because the Austrian king was at the same time the emperor of German nation. So he was so-called the Holy Roman Empire of German nation, because history-wise, the Roman Caesars, the Roman emperor in Rome, in Italy, in Rome, was later on followed by one German in 800, who was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor of German nation. And this title was handed over to the Austrian Emperor. So, and the Austrian Empire expanded a lot. And especially, so even, to give you an example, even the Emperor of Mexico was an Austrian, Maximilian II. Maximilian II. Around 1800, he was Emperor of Mexico, though he had a short reign because he was shot to death by Mexican revolutionaries. And the most famous empress, the woman, the most powerful empress, woman emperor during that time was Maria Theresa. And she had 16 children. So that's 1.5 football teams. And she could marry them all over the place. So Marie Antoinette, who became famous, she was the wife of the French king, who was later then, together with her, beheaded during the French Revolution in 1789. But her name was Maria Antonia. But in France, she became Marie Antoinette. So by marrying those children all over the place, the Spanish king, the French king, and so they expanded the power of the Austrian Empire over whole of Europe by building alliances and actually gaining land all the time. And so it was a very, very big nation and a very powerful nation during that time. Please, next slide. Well, of course, everything comes to an end. And in 1918, after the end of World War I, the Austrian Empire actually split up into all its nations. So finally, it could not hold together anymore because all the peoples, because the Austrian Empire was an empire of many nations. So there were Bulgarians, Romanians, Hungarians, Northern Italians, partly Ukraine, Czechs, Slovaks. So, and they all wanted to get their independence and they wanted to form their own nations. And there was no figure anymore because the last emperor died in 1916. He was the most popular one during that time. There was nobody holding them together. And Austria also, that time, the Austrian Empire lost the First World War. And so only this tiny bit Austria, which you have seen before, was more or less the leftover of a big, big, powerful empire. In November 1918, the First Republic was announced. In 1934, Austria was on the brink of getting taken over that time by the Nazis, who were illegal in Austria. They were forbidden, but there were a lot of illegals underground, a lot of secret Nazis. And they actually tried to overthrow the then government, and they actually killed the Austrian Prime Minister during that Nazi putsch. But this putsch was put down by the Austrian police and armed forces, and it was a little bit delayed, just a few years, until the German army actually invaded Austria. But one has to be a little bit more honest about that. There were a big percentage of Austrians welcomed the Austrian army, the German army coming in. So this was the so-called invasion of roses. So the people were actually throwing roses at them. Nobody was actually fighting them. The Austrian then Prime Minister actually closed his last speech with the words, "God save Austria," but we should not fight each other, and Austrian blood should not be spilled just for a cause which is completely useless. The Austrian army was ready to fight. They were waiting for the order, but they had to stand down. So Austria ceased to exist until 1945. Please, next slide. Until 1945, when it was freed by the Allied forces, by the US forces, France, UK, and by the Soviet-Russian forces. So Austria was occupied for 10 years, and the last soldier left Austria in 1955 after Austria promised to be neutral forever, otherwise we would not have been freed, especially the Soviets demanded this as a condition. So that Austria signed the so-called State Treaty, which was also then signed by the four powers, and Austria was released into freedom finally. And then Austria was lucky to get some resources through the so-called Marshall Fund, the so-called Marshall Plan, and Austria became a very modern state over the next 20 years. So in Germany it happened, this miracle, this economic miracle actually happened during the next 20 years. And the Austrians at this time already started to be, I think, in some areas quite clever. They got the latest technology, they were already thinking about the environment, they started to, and especially it was very important to build a strong middle class. That's why the social welfare state was being built and set up so that the rich can be rich, it's okay, but the poor should have also a good living in the end. So those people who don't make that much money should also be, should have no problem to survive in a dignified way. So that time, the so-called social partnership was formed, and even nowadays there are no strikes in Austria, hardly any strikes in Austria, because of this social partnership. So the workers and the employers, they always sit on the table, talk together, and every year, for example, they set the level of the new salaries for the coming year in the different areas. So in Austria we talk about strike minutes, not days or weeks like in many other countries. And in 1995, this was the last big step towards Europe. Austria became a member of the European Union. Please. One back. Here are some numbers about Austria's economy. Austria is the 13 or 14 richest country in the world, with a developed market economy and a very high standard of living. So the growth, you can see the numbers for yourself, with around 44,000 US dollars per year per capita. The income is actually quite high in Austria. Here are some of the companies which you might not know, or some of the companies you know, but you don't know that they're Austrian. So for example, if you think of Red Bull, Red Bull is an Austrian energy drink. Red Bull has its HQ in Austria and is an Austrian company. Or some people wouldn't know that Porsche, Audi and VW, Porsche is an Austrian company founded by Ferdinand Porsche, who was Austrian. So, Austria's economy has very high quality products, of course, and especially in environmental technologies. Austria is very advanced, and of course tourism is also very important to Austria. Maybe something which might be interesting for you, Austria is like a landlocked country. It's not Mediterranean. If you think about wine, then you would think about Spain, France, Italy, maybe Germany, and of course the US, Australia, New Zealand. But Austria has a very, very long tradition of winemaking. Already 1000 before Christ, they started with a simple form of so-called viticulture. Then they improved it when the Celts came into the area where nowadays Austria is, and then especially the Romans. When the Roman Empire occupied those areas where you find nowadays Austria, they implemented a systematic viticulture, so making wine became very popular. And later on, through the centuries, especially monasteries, monks and priests also like to eat, and they like to eat well, but also to drink well, right? So they also started growing wine. Next slide, please. And here are the 4 Austrian wine regions. So you can see where Austria is centered. You have the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, and it's all in the east. Austria has 4 wine regions, and now I show you the reason why it's all in the east. This one. Because climate-wise, from the north you have cold weather, and from the west, so from the Atlantic and from the north, you have rain and cold. But from the south and the east, you get more sun and you get also more warmth. So the climate is very favorable in the east. That's why I always say we have skiing in the west and wine in the east. The soil, the earth is also ideal to grow wine, and the east is not as mountainous, not with such high mountains, but rather very nice, beautiful, hilly landscapes where you can. This region is, for example, that's on the river Danube. This is a very beautiful wine region called Wachau. This is also the place where I mentioned before, where King Richard Lionheart was actually imprisoned. Please, slide. So, Austrian grapes and Austrian wines are ideal for international sorts, but also the native sorts. For example, the so-called Grüner Veltliner is a very, very typical Austrian grape, or the so-called Zweigel Blaufränkisch. But it also has the Sauvignon Blanc as a white wine, the Pinot Noir, Merlot. So it has all the international wines you can imagine of Austrian manufacture. Austria has always been, through the centuries, very famous and important in the arts and sciences. So the aristocratic families, even the bishops and the Roman Catholic Church, they have always supported artists, gave them jobs, ordered them to do something in their churches, to paint walls or something like this. So in music, this was Mozart. Mozart, for example, was supported by the Archbishop of Salzburg before he went to Vienna and became famous. Joseph Haydn, Johann Strauss, that's the king of waltz. I will tell you a little bit more about him later. in the fine arts, in artistic painting, Egon Schiele and Gustav Klimt, about who I'm going to tell you also a little bit more later. Otto Wagner in architecture and Stefan Zweig in literature. Stefan Zweig, for example, wrote the internationally known book, The Chess Novel. Please, next one. And to tell you more about, this is the oldest famous Austrian we found about 25 years ago, I believe, on a glacier very high up on the mountain, and we called him Ötzi. So he was mummified, and it's estimated that he is around 5,000 years old. So that's why, so actually we have a little bit dispute about what he was, because the Italians claim him. Because the Italians say he actually came from the Italian side and he died on the Austrian side, so he must have been Italian. So we're not really sure. But we still say, well, we found him in Austria, so we think he was Austrian, right? Next one, please. As I mentioned before already, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and just before him, Joseph Haydn, were very, very famous composers. And still nowadays, we love to listen to that kind of classic music. Please, next slide. And here are four of the most important painters. As I mentioned before, Gustav Klimt, who died in 1918 of the Spanish flu, is one of the most important artists from that time. I will show you some pictures afterwards, and I think if you see those pictures, you probably have seen them before. So now you have a face to him. And Egon Schiele, Otto Wagner in architecture, and Koloman Moser were also very, very famous proponents in their fields of expertise of art history. Please. So Gustav Klimt, the one you saw before, he started out as a sort of conventional artist who was then later on influenced also from Asian elements, Egyptian elements. He started to do his typical mosaic style and very colorful way of painting. So he was actually painting in different buildings. He got government orders. He got orders also from churches, from the Roman Catholic Church. So he was painting a lot. But his unique style he developed over the years until 1895. He really started to create his own style. And actually, he started to rebel against the establishment. So he got out from the conservative artistic circles and actually founded his own movement, the so-called Secessionist Movement. And even nowadays exists the Vienna Secession with its own building and its own artists. It was to create a space for artists who were different, young artists and promising, young and promising up-and-coming artists. So who were not, for example, who were a little bit rebellious, who were not recognized by the conservative circles in the universities, in the artistic world, or by newspapers. So during that time, he painted also, during the golden era, so-called golden era, he painted the Kiss and this one, Adele Bloch Bauer. This painting had a special story. It was resold in the US for $130 million about 15 years ago. And before that, it belonged to an Austrian family, but as it had been in the property of a Jewish family before, family Altmann in Austria, it was later on, just after 2002, 2003, I believe, it was handed back into the property of the family. They kept it a few years and then sold it in the United States, as I said, for $130 million. And so the works of Gustav Klimt are very, very high priced. Please, slide. In the next 3 weeks, on, I think, June 24th, you will be able to see an exhibition of Gustav Klimt here in Taipei. It's a multimedia spectacle, and I think it will be about his works, his life, and you will see it it's very successful all over the world. And now this year, for the first time, the Klimt, so-called Klimt Experience visual art exhibition will hit off on the 24th of June in the Songshan Cultural Center. Please, next slide. So you will see the different works, and you will go through a multimedia journey in which the most important works of Gustav Klimt will be presented. And this year, Gustav Klimt was born in 1862. So Gustav Klimt's birthday was 160 years ago. So it's this year's anniversary. Please, next one. In literature, we have more or less two rather recent Nobel Prize winners. I think that was in 2002 or 2003. So-called Elfriede Jelinek won the Nobel Literature Prize, and 10 years later, Peter Handke also won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And who is very, very famous and important, especially in the German-speaking area. His name is Thomas Brezina. He was actually working as a TV moderator for children's program for many years. Then he started to write his own books, and his books in some parts of the world are actually better sold than J.K. Rowling's, what's his name? I forgot now. Harry Potter. In some areas, his books, they are translated in so many languages, even in Chinese. So this is, and I really like also children's books. And by the way, we are going to, later on, I will ask you in a quiz, a question, and you will have the opportunity, with the right answer, to get one of these, actually 3 books. It's 2 children books, one in Chinese and in English, and the other one, a travel guide about Austria, but written by Taiwanese. That's what I like most. If somebody travels to that country and tells, and she tells in her own words, her own experiences, in her own language. So that's why I like this book, Amazing Austria, very, very much. Please, slide. And of course, others we call the national writer was so-called Franz Grillparzer. And I mentioned him before, Stefan Zweig, who actually went to Southern America later on and also wrote his most famous novel, the so-called chess novel. Next one, please. And here are some more famous Austrians, not from well, partly from, if you would call that art history. Everybody knows the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was born Austrian, became the muscle man, and he became a Hollywood superstar. Or another one, the Austrian Daredevil. He was the first human being to jump from the stratosphere very high up the earth without protection, and then for kilometers to a very long fall, and then actually he survived the whole thing and everything worked out. Please, next one. A place, Austrians, but also those people writing, authors, artists, that's the Vienna Coffeehouse. The Vienna Coffeehouse, well, Austria was invaded twice by the Turks. And the second invasion in 1683, they were defeated again by the Austrian army just in Vienna. But there was one thing they left behind, and that was coffee. there were some people who really started to like this drink. They got coffee beans, started experimenting with it, roasting it, and the first coffee house actually opened in the 18th century. And later on, add to that Wienerschnitzel, desserts, and a very comfortable place to sit where nobody bothers you. And it's not like sitting in Starbucks where you get your plastic and you go in and you drink your coffee very fast, you go out. No, you can actually sit for hours. In most of the Austrian coffee shops, you get a wide selection of newspapers. Nobody will bother you if you only consume or drink one coffee in the next 2 hours. So it's a place of peace and quiet. But it was also a place to discuss, to write. So, and during also in the start of the 20th century, there was something called coffee house literature. There were, at least in the German-speaking world, Franz Musil, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, but also I mentioned Stefan Zweig. They did not grow up in a coffee house, but they loved to go there daily and write their books, write their works. And also the artists I mentioned before, Gustav Klimt, Egon Schiele, they also liked to meet in the coffee house. This is my favorite coffee house in Vienna. I will be leaving quite soon on my on a vacation, but also on a business trip back to Austria. This one I can actually recommend because it's not as touristy. It's not so well known. It's a very old traditional. It's from 1832, I believe. And please, next slide. The interior is still in the original. Is still original. Please, next one. And it's still typical. You actually can really go and play billiard, but not the 9-hole billiard, but the one called carom ball billiard with only 3 balls. So, for example, this one, I was actually teaching my son how to play this in this coffee shop. We spent actually quite a lot of time there doing homework, doing some writing, and it was just great because they have great food, they have great coffee, they have great desserts, and it's very quiet actually. And they also on the other side, I think at 5 p.m. they start with somebody playing the piano for the evening. Please, next one. What also Austrians love really is, of course, music and dancing. Johann Strauss, this guy you see here, Johann Strauss is the so-called king of waltz. If you listen to the New Year's concert, which is also broadcast here in Taiwan every year, or also in Kaohsiung at the live big, huge screening spectacle where usually in non-COVID times 10 to 15,000 people are attending this. The famous waltz on the Blue Danube, it's called. But as Austrians, this dance became so popular. And Austrians love to have a festival and to have fun. So they started out with dancing festivals in the 18th century, and nowadays we have more than so-called balls later on. Just in the city of Vienna we have 400 plus balls, so that kind of dancing evenings between 11th of November and 15th of February. But those balls are all over Austria, so I couldn't even tell you how many there are. I don't know. Also, when classes are graduating from higher schools, they usually have not a prom, but a ball. What would we call a ball? It's a kind of prom, you would say, but it is with classic music, and the youngsters who are graduating from school, they have already learned dancing, and they also do, actually they study an opening dance. to show to their parents what they have achieved, that they are finally getting ready for life, and it's their final thing, what they do the last time in high school. Please, next one. The most famous ball in Austria is the Vienna Opera Ball, which is also broadcast, I think, to 126 countries. This ball every year, the so-called young debutants, those are these ones. They study this opening dance for like 2 months, and they usually they have the nice white gowns. The gentlemen, of course, in very official and dress and suits, and young people really love to be able to get into that circle and do the opening dance. Please, next one. In Vienna, the Chinese New Year ball, that's, I have to say, I've been to that ball, I think 3 times, and I really have to say honestly, because this is one of the best balls in Vienna. It is organized by the, what do you call that? By the Taiwan Organization of Entrepreneurs in Vienna, and co-hosted by the Taiwan office in Austria, by the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. And because you have a lot of the building in which they do that, it's very old, traditional, and beautiful, with a huge hall, and you really have space there, space to dance. And it was also the first time I had seen that myself, so-called taxi dancers. I'm not sure if you ever heard about that. Me neither, but a few years ago I found out. There were taxi dancers because men tend not to like dancing so much like women. Is that so here the same? Is that the same here? Possibly. So that's why for all the ladies whose husband, partner, or did come alone, there are taxi dancers. They are not for hire, but they are, yes, they are for hire, but you don't have to pay for that as a guest, because they have already been paid for. They are there to dance with you. And this is a great feature of this ball. Please, next one. In Austria, what we love to eat is so-called Wienerschnitzel, which is pork, veal. The original one is veal cutlet, which is then breaded in egg, in flour, egg, and breadcrumbs, and then actually fried in a pan. And you usually, nowadays, you eat it more or less with either rice, or of course, French fries. That's what the kids love, or potato salad. But this is like the national dish. You get it anywhere. Also in the coffee house I just showed you before. And the second, maybe most famous one is the Austrian apple strudel, Apfelstrudel it's called, which is an apple cake usually served with vanilla sauce or with vanilla ice. And now I want to show you a short movie about studying in Austria. I think most of the elements are anyway in the video, so I don't need to talk that much about this. Please, go ahead. So this was to give you a short overview about studying in Austria. And here you find some of the links where you find quite good information, especially about English programs, how to get a scholarship, where you also can go through grants, AT it's called. That is this one here, for scholarships and grants. And there you just, for example, if you search, just choose Taiwan from the country list and then hit the button. You will get loads of results about scholarships and grants. Please, next slide. So, slowly but surely, I think I should come to an end. To sum it up a little bit, to give you a few impressions also, here is a picture of so-called Castle Schönbrunn, which was the summer seat of the Austrian imperial family in summer, with its beautiful garden. So Austria is very traditional, monumental, with a lot of historic sites. Next one, please. Austria is crystal clear. Why I'm saying that, because in Austria, the lakes and rivers, more than 99% of excellent quality, meaning this is all drinking water. In Austria, not really anybody bothers to go into the grocery store and buy a bottle of water, because we get best, very good water from our taps. You can fill up your bottle at home. So that's also due to the very strict environmental laws we've had in place for a long time. Next one. And also, Austria, of course, is also changing in the arts. So, historic museums with modern parts and with new trends, also a mix. So, Austria is also unconventional, which I would call. Austria is impressive. You can see it high in the mountains. This is all in the west. You can, for example, go skiing year-round on the glaciers. Next one. And Austria is, what would you call it, lovely. You know, I just called this one lovely because of its natural beauty. You just can walk in the mountains. In Austria, you can just walk into the forest during the summertime. You can collect blackberries, raspberries. You don't have to pay for it. Or you could just collect mushrooms. You can find it anywhere during July and August. So, you know, sometimes if I go through a forest, and when I went with my son to collect like raspberries or something, and then you collect 2 handful or 3 handful, and then you would think, oh my God, that's actually quite expensive if I go to the grocery store, but here I get it for free. And last but not least, now you will have the opportunity to win something with the correct answers. Actually, three can win one of these books. So please have a look. Who is not a famous Austrian? Please don't say anything yet, but I would like to 3 persons, if you know the answer, to raise your hand, please. Just to raise your hand. Wow. 1, 2, 3. And now you just tell me the answer.
Ludwig.
Ludwig van Beethoven. Right. Thank you. And sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Not an Austrian. Sorry, you?
我们现在现场开放的是就是有奖征答的活动啊，因为现场是开放3位观众来回答荧幕上的这个问题哦，就是说现在在讲了这么久之后，到底哪一位不是著名的奥地利人这样子？所以我们现在在一个一个确认答案当中。
So actually, the correct answer is, and has been identified by 3 persons, Ludwig van Beethoven. Actually, still, the Austrians claim him up to a certain extent because when he moved to Austria, and Beethoven actually occupied, can you imagine, 67 apartments in Austria, in Vienna. He lived in 67 places in Vienna. And he actually became the famous artist he was through the teachings of Austrian composers during that time. So that's why we quite a lot claim him. We call him, he's a Viennese composer. He's from Vienna. That's what we say. Of course, we know in back of our head, he's German, born German, but we still consider him Austrian. So, you have one. You're the first one. So please, you can choose which book you would like. Amazing Austria, or one of these 2 versions, the Emperor of China's Ice, which has been created by an Austrian artist. So it's up to you. You would like to have one of these? Chinese or English version? Please, there you go. You.
那我刚刚帮代表补充一下，就是他说3位人士里面哪一个不是奥地利人哦？其实答案会是那个贝多芬。可是贝多芬其实有一点争议，因为他在奥地利他其实有67处房产哦，而且他教的学生其实也后来都是非常著名的奥地利的那个作词作曲人这样子。所以他们当然在讲音乐家的时候会说，哦，他是在维也纳这边发扬光大的，但他其实就是德国出生的人这样子。
谢谢。Okay, and I believe with this one, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was a little bit interesting for you to get an overview about Austria, and hopefully I'll see you next year at the Taipei International Book Exhibition again. I will still be here. I think we're going to take part, hopefully. So thank you very much, and you have a great day. Thank you.